name is Amanda Presky, and I run Circuit Breaker Labs, which is a business I created that takes scrap electronics, whether it's computers, keyboards, capacitors, resistors, wires, anything like that, and turns it into jewelry and art. So I work out of my studio down here in the basement in Capitol Heights, Maryland, which is right on the blue line, just on the DC Maryland border. So I started this, about 13, 14 years ago when I was just starting an undergrad. I went to school for chemistry, and I even hold a PhD in chemistry because apparently I don't know how to give up on anything. And so the whole time I got into working with circuit boards because there was always broken lab equipment sitting around, and I thought it was neat looking and wanted to do something more productive than just having a pile of junk in the corner. So having made jewelry for years and years, that's what I did as a kid, I decided it would be really awesome to make circuit board jewelry. So that was started, and I started putting stuff out at craft shows and really started to discover that people loved it. So I kept working on it and building more and more products, adding men's accessories, adding a line of art, ornaments. My catalog is very huge now, but I love every part of it and being able to make so many things for so many people. This business has been my full-time job for the last 4 years or so, and the whole situation going on right now has sort of thrown a wrench into my plans for this year, but I'm making an effort to do some pivoting and more marketing and whatnot so that people can learn about what I do and how I do it. So today I'm going to show you around my studio and give you an idea of sort of the tools and materials and processes that go into making circuit board jewelry. So this is where everything gets started. This is where I store all my raw materials, so circuit boards mostly, and process all them to become final pieces. So we start over here. This is sort of the raw board section. So this is just motherboard pulled out of the computer, so it's still got all its components and hookups and things like that attached. But in order to make jewelry, which is pretty flat, I need to remove a lot of those components. So I come over here to do that. So I've got hammer and chisels and some other tools, miter saw, things like that to help me cut down the boards into a usable size so that I can get them to this point. So I've removed a lot of the connections, plastic bits, bars, wires, and any tall components and chips and things that just won't fit under a layer of resin. And then they're all sorted by color. Looks like I have a lot of clearing off to do. And then once I start cutting into them and using them, they go on this side so that I can have stuff ready to go for small pieces. So if I only need like a pendant or something, I can use that top corner. I'm ready to go. But if I need to do a large scale art piece or something, I'm going to want to pull from over here where there's no holes yet that won't interfere with what I'm trying to do. A big thing that's important in the process of working with circuit boards is safety. So circuit boards are pointy, they contain fiberglass, which is not good for your skin or your body, and a lot of them contain heavy metals that can come airborne when you are cutting them up. So it's really important that I'm protecting myself through the whole process of making. So I usually am always wearing a face shield so that as I'm removing parts, they're not hitting me in the face. It also prevents any dust from getting in. If I'm using my saws, which are really loud, I would need ear protection. I'm always wearing these rubber coated gloves just to protect my hands from any of the dust, fiberglass, pointy parts. A lot of the wires that stick through the boards are very sharp, so it's good to protect against those. And if I'm around any particulates, I'm going to be wearing a respirator because I do not want any of that in my lungs. So while I encourage people to upcycle and create new things out of trash, just be careful about what you're cutting into and what you're working with because you don't want to be unsafe. So there's not exactly a tutorial you could look up for how to do this. So a lot of what I've done over the years has been by sort of combining techniques I've learned through other crafts. So for example, I've got some metal smithing tools here, a torch, third hands, a charcoal block, things like that to do some metal smithing. But I also use the torch in the resin making process. And then I use a lot of woodworking techniques as well. So hammers, chisels, saws, the sort of adhesives and materials used to handle wood also translate really well into working with circuit board. This is perhaps my favorite tool in the whole studio. This is a CNC router, which is a cutting tool. Basically what it does is it's a fast spinning fancy drill bit that can cut through a whole bunch of materials, including, as it turns out, circuit board. So this is the part that does that, and it moves on this X axis like this, and then on the Y this board moves. So between those two movement systems you can cut out anything from the work surface. So I have had to devise some specialized parameters in order to cut through boards, and also account for the fact that boards are not flat. Most milled materials are sheet form, and that is just not what a used circuit board is like. A lot of my process is divided into steps, and each step has its own station. And then within each station I have an organizational system for keeping track of what's what. So I use these trays a lot to organize wholesale orders, retail orders, projects in process, stuff that needs to get fixed, all that kind of thing. So right here I've got some Maryland flag pieces, and you'll notice there's some really odd shapes, and that's because this is a special kind of Maryland flag where it's the shape of Maryland but in the flag colors and shapes. So I'll show a picture of what that looks like completed. I gave up an awesome closet, the only closet in the entire basement, to turn it into a resin room. So what this allows me to do is apply resin, but then close the door and leave and not worry about it getting messed up. So I work on wax paper so that if I have any overflows I can just peel it right off. And then I use these incandescent lamps. So I specifically buy incandescent bulbs because they produce a lot of heat. They're inefficient, so don't use them in your lighting fixtures for normal lighting, but if you need heat, it's excellent. So because we're in the basement, it's a little chillier, and in order to run resin properly and not have any bubbles or have it be cloudy, it's gotta be warm. So I set anything under these lamps, and it's usually around 75 degrees or so it's the perfect temperature. And if you're curious, I use a product called Pro Marine Tabletop Epoxy to do my resin. It's not meant for casting, so it's a thin layer finish, and it has a reasonably high viscosity and surface tension. So when I do resin on my pieces, it creates this bubble effect, which I really love. And then over here I've got a torch so that I can get rid of bubbles. That helps a lot to release trapped gases by heating. So a reasonable chunk of my business is conducted online, so I need a lot of good photos for listing online and especially for social media. So I use this light box. It's sort of like a tent. It collapses into like the size of a dinner plate, but what it does is it diffuses the light really nicely and creates a well-lit area for doing photographs. So the background, this is my signature background. I wanted something sort of industrial, but that wouldn't really take away from the photo itself. So when I use a short depth of field, that will be nicely blurred out. And what it actually is blueprints from a construction site in upstate New York. And in order to take all of my photos, I have a bunch of props and things that I use depending on the season and what I'm trying to go for. My favorite thing to use is floppy disks because there's so many different colors and they're such a quintessential computer type peripheral related item. And I also love heat sinks because they've got a lot of texture, but they're silver, so they really go with everything. I've got some laboratory glassware, some nods back to my chemistry days. A lot of metals, rusty things, silver colored items, cake pans, things like that, where in the photo you can't tell what they are, but they look sort of vaguely industrial, which I think really goes well with the look I'm trying to achieve. And there's some sort of greenery for holiday shots. There's some roses from Valentine's Day, some autumn leaves. This is what I call my dry work area. So it's basically the finishing touches on making jewelry. So there's a lot of findings, chains, pliers, beads, charms, things like that that I'm using to create finished pieces. It's also a big area, a big workspace, so a lot of times I'll use it for packaging, like these cute little earrings that come in a test tube. So everything's sorted by metal type, so it's easy to find. And I'll use a variety of pliers and things like this to make the loops, attach beads to things, or resistors, capacitors, things like that, which this is only a tiny little section of what I have in terms of resistors and capacitors. So one thing I've been doing to feel useful at this time is mask making. So I have actually been sewing since I was a kid. I've never done it in any like business capacity really, but I've got this old sewing machine from my grandma and a bunch of tools, and materials from my mom and my aunts. And here's a tip if you're making a lot of masks and find that cutting elastic to a certain length is really annoying. I found this bottle in my kitchen that is just the right diameter so that when I wrap elastic around it a bunch of times I can just cut once and then I've got like 20 pieces cut all at once. But I'm using science fabric because I'm a science nerd. So I've had a stash of fabric that I've sort of been collecting over the years because as a chemist that's sort of what my eye is always drawn to, is sort of nerdy, science-y, and especially chemistry type things. So what I've got going on is a collection of science masks that encompass chemistry, computing, biology, and physics. And then these are fun, continuing my upcycled theme. These were sheets. So I bought a flat sheet to use as my craft show display and was left with a fitted sheet and some pillowcases that I did not need. So I cut them up and made these masks out of them. So they're nice and nerdy, but they're not so like colorful and overdone. Thanks for coming into my studio and seeing how I make everything. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them either now or later if you want to send me an email. I'm easy to reach. It's just Circuit Breaker Labs everywhere, at gmail.com, on Etsy. I'd love to reach out to you, especially without being able to do craft shows. I'm really missing that interaction with people, especially as an extrovert. So if you'd like to support small, you don't have to buy anything. I'd love it if you did at circuitbreakerlabs.com. But support right now comes in many forms, so even just liking or sharing my work goes a long way in helping me build my business. Thanks so much.